this video, we're going to look at user rates and assigning crew to a job. To set a user's rate, as well as set their rate type, from the admin users list, select a user and scroll down to the user rates section. The details included here will show the currently active rate, currency, P&W amount, rate type, as well as any payroll group if applicable. Clicking on the user rate will open the user rates table. Here we can see a grid of any past or current rates, and we can also make new rates. To create a new rate, click on the ellipsis menu and choose Add Rate. You can set the start date for the new rate to become active. The current date will be used by default. Next, set a new rate. The previously used rate will be used as the default value here. In this case, we'll raise it up by $5. You can choose a currency for this user. Choosing an alternate currency for a user will show their rate in their selected currency. However, all actualized values will either use the job currency or the studio currency, depending upon the location of the actuals. Moving on, we can set an additional P&W amount, and then we can set the rate type. Now, there are 4 rate types to choose from: hourly rates, day rates, fixed rates, and using payroll rules. Hourly rates use straight hours entered on time cards and have values at which overtime and double time can be triggered during the week as well as on the weekend. For example, in this case, overtime would start after 8 hours was entered on a day, and double time would start after 10 hours were entered on a day. If we wanted this user's rate to automatically start with overtime on Saturday, we can set the starting value for overtime to 0. This means that any hours entered on Saturday will automatically be applied towards overtime, and double time would start after 10 hours. On Sunday, if we wanted double time to start immediately, we could set both overtime and double time to 0. This means any hours entered on that day will automatically be applied towards double time. Now, when using a day rates still use the overtime and double time threshold values. However, the rate will only be applied once per day as long as there is a time card on that day. When looking at time card values, the overtime and double time will still be reflected for that user on those time cards, just not calculated into the actuals. Similar to day rates, fixed rates will also visualize overtime and double time values, but the user's rate will only be applied once per job, no matter how many time cards are attached to the job. Lastly, payroll requires the selection of a payroll group. Payroll groups are a combination of rules that users can determine to set fluctuating rates to meet compliance regulations. We'll cover creating payroll rules more in depth in another video, but briefly just so you see where these are defined, if you go to time cards, payroll, you can create multiple sets of rules. In this case, I have a set of rules that meet the California overtime rules. Clicking on a rule lets me modify and update them with various settings. And each rule has a condition as well as an effect. You can combine rule sets into groups. So in this case, I have California labor laws as well as any internal company rules. And that is what I've selected for my user here in my payroll group. Now, these rates are the rates that will be used when a user is added to the crew. So for example, if I go over to production crew inside of a job and I drag this user over, I can see that the rate type of payroll and the rate we just set is the current rate applied. Now you'll see the active rate is set as user. This can be modified, but only when a user is not on payroll. For example, I'll drag another user over, and if I click the edit button, modifying the field for any user on the crew will override the user rate for the job. At this point, all time cards for this job will use the rate specified here. Any changes to the user's rate table will not adjust any crew members who have an active rate set to job. In this case, I can adjust the day rate, make my changes, and click OK to save. Now we can see that the active rate is set to job. If I want to revert my changes and set this user back to using the user rates table, I can click the edit button and click the reset to reset the job rate back to the user's current rate. Now you can see here, the rate is now locked to the user's rate table. Additionally, within the crew, I can modify the permissions for this job. Let's say this user was an artist by default, but on this job, he's going to be a supervisor. I can choose supervisor and click OK, And here we can see the new permission for this job only has been applied. Any permission modifications will always be highlighted to indicate that they are not the default permissions. Now, in addition to adding users to the crew individually, you can also add user groups at a time. So for example, if I wanted to add all of my animators, I can grab my animators and drag and drop them over to the crew. I'll see all of the default rates applied, all defaulting to the user rate table. Now you can go in and make any modifications as needed. Please keep in mind that the user rate table is a dated list of rates. This means that the user's rate could technically change over the course of a job. All time cards up until that new rate change will use the rate for the applicable dates. Any time card after the starting date of a new rate will use that new rate. This is different than the job rate, which uses a fixed rate for the duration of the job. And that is a quick overview of setting user rates and adding users to the crew of a job. For more information, please see the NIM documentation. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to email us at support@nim-labs.com. Thank you.